So as you might know, Brimbank Aquatic Wellness Centre opened on the 12th of September 2022, so a year ago today. It's Australia's first 100% renewable energy powered, zero greenhouse gas emissions aquatic centre, which achieved a 6-star Green Star rating. There's been a lot of communications so far about design. We've taken lots of tours and done lots of presentations and released a lot of reports about that. And now we're keen to start talking about how it's operating in reality. So what does it look like to run an all-electric aquatic centre? How's it working? And what needs to be done to keep it operating well? And today's event is really an opportunity to ask those questions and chat with the people who have been involved from this project on the start and some people who are now analysing how it's working. So we'll hear firstly from Nick Mulvany and Thorsten Padeffke, who will do a brief presentation firstly about the design of the centre and then an operations analysis. And then we'll go into a Q&A with some of the people who from Brimbank who are involved in the building and maintenance of the centre. And you'll have an opportunity to ask questions in that event. And that will be the end of the hybrid session. Following that, we'll take a tour for everyone here in person to the back-end plant of the centre. So without further ado, I'll introduce Thorsten for our first presentation. Thorsten is an ESD consultant with construction industry experience spanning over 30 years, including the past 23 years in the sustainability industry. He has been the lead ESD consultant over 150 projects, 14 of which are aquatic centres. Thorsten is a principal ESD consultant at LCI and leads the Melbourne sustainability team. You can just press that arrow to continue.
All right, so I'm here to talk a little bit about the facility and how we designed it and all its features.
Oh, it's not sharing? Oh, okay, sorry, Thorsten. 1 second. We'll just share online. Sorry, everyone. Can anyone see that online? Yeah. Okay, cool. Sorry. Thank you.
All right, so a quick overview. I've been told I've only got 10 minutes, so I'll make it quick. We'll have a walk through the facility anyway, so we don't really have to talk about what it all offers. But a little bit about the sustainability approach. So when we started designing the facility, we really looked at the performance. Council's given us some really good performance requirements, but we extended up on that and really just focused on all the measurable performance requirements that we could think of. What to start with is the fabric first approach, so make the building as efficient as we can before we even look at all the technology inside of it. It's a really holistic approach that we took. Green Star then, it was already a brief requirement, but we basically layered Green Star over the top of our performance requirements, and then we found that we're actually doing quite well already. We pretty much were achieving the 5 stars, and there was an option to go to 6 stars in the design. We also looked at some other tools like the well tool, passive house, and a few others that we sort of borrowed a few strategies from those tools. And of course, net zero carbon ready, that was always a brief requirement. So talking about net zero carbon ready, what does it take to get there? The first step, and there's a few steps that we took, but the first step was passive solar design. So as I said, make the thermal envelope as good as we can, make use of the sun where we can, provide lots of shading where we don't want too much sun in the building. The thermal envelope itself, I'm not sure if you can really see it, the screen's a bit too small, but we insulated the whole building as you do by code. But we also ended up insulating the concourse. We've insulated all the pools, the warm water tanks, anything where we've got energy to lose, we insulated really, really well. And especially the insulation of the pool, that was quite a bit of a challenge because it's not done very often. But we managed to do so, and our energy results show that it works really well. Our low flow showers I put in there because that's something that's often overlooked, but there's actually quite a significant amount of energy in the hot water that we need for showers. So if we reduce the water that goes through the showers, then we can reduce the energy demand. Step 2 was to increase the energy efficiency of the selected equipment. Initially, we were actually going with gas boilers, but then we'll talk about this a bit later. Then we switched to heat pumps because council got some government funding. And when we looked at the heat pumps, we tried to choose the heat pumps with the best efficiencies. Turns out that the best heat pumps that we can get, they were quite expensive. They cost us almost double of what we paid for these heat pumps, or what the cost was for these heat pumps. So, but we looked at efficiencies for each single heat pump, and we'll talk about this a little bit later because we've got different types. We looked at the heat pumps for domestic hot water. There's actually a little error in here. We don't have 6 domestic hot water heat pumps. I believe we only got 1 and then 5 storage tanks. We looked at sequencing of the heat pumps for optimal COPs, and Nick will probably talk about that a little bit more. We've employed a ventilation strategy that's called the open balance ventilation system. And that's, I always say, it's about 80% magic and 20% physics, because I don't know how it works, but I know that it does work. The 20% that I understand is that it works with a Brownian motion, which is a exchange of energy between molecules. But that's where it leaves me. What it does do, that I know, it reduces the fan energy requirements by about 30%. It creates still air films over all surfaces, meaning that we've got hardly any condensation or no condensation at all. We can reduce the evaporation from the pool itself significantly. And one of the best features, I believe, is that it reduces stratification to almost nothing, meaning that the temperature at the ground is almost the same temperature as right under the sea.
It says we're still sharing, so that should work.
Oh, you back on?
Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Excellent. So solar, we were able to increase the solar system from 250 kilowatts to 500, and that's producing a significant amount of the total energy demand, electricity demand, 14% we calculated. That were the 4 steps to get to net zero carbon. Now a little bit about the heat pumps itself. We have got 3 different types of heat pumps. One is a 4-pipe heat pump that produces chilled water and heating hot water at the same process. Then we've got a reverse cycle heat pump that basically you can switch it to heating or cooling depending on demand. And then we've got a heating only heat pump because we know that in the middle of winter we need as much heat as we can get. We do have a number of buffer tanks that are well intended to use when a heat pump goes into defrost cycle, for example. And then we do have, and I've graded out a little bit, we do have a gas backup boiler that is supposed to only kick in emergencies. I have to say that at the moment it still kicks in every now and then, and we know that's an issue that we need to work on, but it's essentially it's tuning. So the heat pumps itself should be able to cover most of the heat or heat demand. Operations. So performance so far, 76% reduction on total energy use, and that's significant. That was huge. When I saw the numbers, I couldn't believe it, and we checked it again and checked it again. Of course, you've got to explain where against what? Where's the baseline? And what we did is we looked at a report that the RMIT brought out only a few years ago. They looked at all major aquatic centers in Victoria, and without naming them, they actually put in all the data, as in the size, the area of surface area of water, and then the energy demands, gas, electricity, and so on. And we picked a few that were sort of the most similar to our facility, and then we created the baselines through that. So when you compare that against the average aquatic center, 76% reduction in total energy use. To see how well the building itself works, we actually calculated what the energy reduction would be if the baseline is based on electricity only, as in, you know, replacing those gas boilers with heat pumps. Comparing our facility against the standard aquatic center, we still had a 52% reduction of energy, and that's basically comes down to the efficiency of the equipment, of course, but the building envelope, the really well working building envelope. And then we also worked out the greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, gas has got a lot lower greenhouse gas content than electricity. So we worked out that our facility still provides 35% reduction. But of course, that is not really the full story, because we are subscribing to 100% renewable energy, electricity, and with that, it is CO2 neutral. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Now, so enough room to stretch out.
Yeah. Oh, careful. Just.
Excellent. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Nick Mulvany.
Can I introduce you?
Oh, yeah.
I've got a nice little bio here.
So
That's right. Nick is a built environment sustainability specialist with over 15 years experience in building services and sustainability. His experience includes sustainable design, regulatory requirements, energy demand, behaviour of buildings, renewable energy and energy management systems. He has significant implementation knowledge of energy technologies, including PV, renewable energy systems, energy storage, demand response and utility management systems. Thanks.
that sounded so good that it's almost like I wrote it myself.
Yeah.
Thanks all. So just as a point of clarification, so Lucid Consulting, we're sustainability and energy services consultants. Our role on this project has been very minor in compared to the likes of Thorsten and some other parties here. So Lucid's been engaged by Brimbank to assist with some of the, I guess, the data trawling and sifting through the large amount of data that's coming out of this facility and how it's performing. So we weren't involved in any of the really difficult phases of these projects, which is convincing stakeholders to make very big decisions and to support stakeholders with rock solid consultancy and numbers and engineering advice. And so that was this man in this project. So look, I don't want to take any glory away from Thorsten, because he's done an absolutely outstanding job on this project in conjunction with internal stakeholders at Brimbank in terms of this facility, which is a landmark facility. So just very quickly, we just want to touch upon some of the performance monitoring aspects of this facility, because really it's where the rubber hits the road, it's where the numbers are, it's where this whole concept of all electric is made or not made, is the analysis of this data. This is quite high level. Just as a brief summary of some of the systems that we have available for monitoring that performance and tuning the performance. As Thorsten touched upon, the gas boiler is kicking on, but I definitely don't want people to leave from this room thinking that that's a failure of the project. It is a teething issue that we're working through with FMs, and there's some technical reasons for that, which I'll explain in a moment. Touching on the solar PV system and also the thermal energy storage. So when we do the tour, it's the plant, the key plant is so big and out in the open that it's going to be really easy to run a tour and point out the interesting bits. Very quickly, we've got a really comprehensive and detailed building management system here that's giving us all the key parameters of the systems, so we can do deep dives into trend logs and other bits and pieces of the building services plant. There's a separate system, which is actually the EMS, which is the I guess the energy management system. This facility has 34 electricity meters. It's got 3 gas meters, and it has 12 thermal meters. That's a really important, piece for a facility like this, is that there is no point building a facility of this scale and size and complexity, and then not having the meters, the sub-metering capability in the facility to actually drive the performance. So that's a takeaway for a lot of your facilities. If there's people here that are partway through capital works programs for large aquatic centres, get the metering right, and it makes my job a whole heap easier. As Thorsten touched upon, we've got a really unique
Oh, here we go. All right. Sorry, everyone. Sorry, Nick.
That's all right. We're back. Fantastic. Yeah, so fundamentally, the whole system's operating on heat pumps from a thermal perspective, and really that is a combined system. And I guess the magic piece of the puzzle here is the 4-pipe simultaneous heating and cooling heat pump, which has the ability to generate heating hot water and chilled water at the same time. And basically, all it's doing is removing heat, thermal energy from the chilled water, and it's putting it into the hot water. It's as simple as it is. Ultimately, these facilities have very, very large heating hot water demands. But at the same time, there's a lot of spaces that require chilled water for cooling, so your gym spaces, office spaces, etc., etc. So this facility actually has a really harmonious approach to that thermal energy management, because you've got synergies between, if you've got your gyms are full and there's a Zumba session, banging away, what you will have is that you'll have a lot of heat generation in that space, which is being essentially recovered and then rejected to the heating hot water. So it's a great system thermally. The boiler sitting off to the left-hand side is there as a backup and a redundancy, and we'll dip into some of the performance characteristics of that. The concept of coefficient of performance is a really, really big one. Right? You can electrify anything, but can you electrify things efficiently? And that's the important part. Traditional thermal systems within buildings are operating with flow and return temperatures of 80 degrees and 60 degrees return. That's very high. You can't, for the vast majority of heat pumps, you're not achieving that level of heat, so that the 80 degree temperature, not achieving that efficiently. So to achieve the optimized performance of a heat pump, to maximize the energy efficiency, this facility actually runs a very low heating hot water temperature. From memory, it's 53 degrees, which is a lot less than the 80 degrees. So it's 53 degrees out to the field, out to devices within the building, so heating coils and heat exchangers, etc. And what's coming back from the field is 48 degrees. So there's a 5 degree temperature differential between the flow and return out to the field and back to the heat pumps. That's a really important aspect because you're trying to optimize efficiency of the heat pump units. If you tried to operate these heat pump units up to 80 degrees in terms of the thermal generation, you'd see that there would be a drop-off in efficiency. So that's another key takeaway for this. In terms of the actual thermal energy output from the facility, from the three heat pumps, what we've got here is, the monthly data for the last 6 months. Really what we've done in terms of performance monitoring is we're scrubbing September, October, November, December from last year, because that was immediately after the facility opened and there's going to be teething issues and building tuning and other bits and pieces. So we're taking the clean slate of the calendar year this year as the performance monitoring period and and that's going to be the basis, because a lot of the issues were worked out from the back end of last year. What you're seeing here is the thermal generation per month from each of the heat pumps. So you can see that what have we got here? The 4-part reverse cycle chiller is doing the bulk of the thermal generation for heating hot water. That's in the orange. You then have these should be flipped around. You've got the 2-part heating only heat pump, which is the red. That's doing the next. And then what you've got is you've got the next one, which is the 2-part reverse cycle. So that reverse cycle unit can flip into heating or cooling, depending on what the building needs, doing the top up. And as you can see, that as you'd expect from January, moving all the way through to August, seeing that massive ramp up in thermal energy demand, and that's purely just climate based, and we're moving into winter. Equally, from a chilled water perspective, the building's showing the exact trend that you want to see. So January, you've got a lot of cooling demand in a facility like this in the summer months, and then that's obviously dropping off to I won't say next to zero. The interesting thing is we've got the 4-part reverse cycle chiller, which is generating chilled water at the same time that it's generating heating hot water. It's supported by the reverse cycle chiller. The reverse cycle chiller, from a cooling perspective, isn't generating chilled water. And what that means is that the cooling load thus far is being met by the 4-part the 4-part simultaneous unit. So in terms of gas, so this is probably the key thing that everyone wants to know, is the gas boiler was intended as backup only and to provide redundancy under key events where the pool has to be drained down and then refilled with water and then heated back up very quickly. It does appear to be operating, and what we've got here is the gas consumption, cubic meters converted to gigajoules, the boiler thermal input, which is estimated from the gas consumption, versus the actual thermal input from the heat pumps themselves. So you can see that the gas boiler is kicking in, but it's a very, very, very small amount. And there's some operational issues that we're working through in terms of why that's the case. If we have a look at the months, there were 6 days in August where the boiler kicked in. July, there was 11 days. June, there were 9 days. And May, there were 8 days. Right, so that's not saying that the boiler was running all of those days. We're saying that the boiler kicked in for whatever reason. This is May, so you can see the days in May. So these are the events where the boiler turned on. This is June. This is July. And then we'll just swing back to May, because what we've done is we've overlaid the ambient conditions from the BOM to illustrate when that's turning on. And typically they're turning on, it's kicking in where there's very, very low ambience, so overnight mins in the blue, or it was just flat out one of those rubbish Melbourne days where it never gets above 13, 14 degrees. There's a couple of days where it was super cold, 4.7 degrees min, but the daytime temperature popped up to 18.1, the boiler didn't kick in. The pink box, dashed box, ultimately, sorry, that's July. The pink box here is the recorded day of the largest gas injection largest thermal injection from gas in the facility. And that day looks like that. So that particular day, The boiler was coming on, but again, please keep in mind those minuscule percentages in context of the total thermal energy that's being injected into these pools, into this facility. Absolutely negligible. So at this stage, we're still working through. My firm belief is that it's likely a controls algorithm, possibly based on enthalpy or minimum temperatures where it is kicking in. There's an exercise that we're doing to work through testing what the impact is if we switch that boiler off and see what's happening with the systems. But fundamentally, the takeaway from this is that this is an incredible facility that is predominantly operating on electricity to a very, very, very high percentage. And that electricity is 100% renewable, and that's an exceptional outcome for a facility of this scale. And the gas consumption of this backup boiler is a source of ongoing investigation to determine exactly why that's occurring. So it's a big lessons learned. Takeaway: solar PV. So there's a 500 kilowatt PV system. Those familiar with PV will, see that. Yeah, again, thank you, Melbourne. Crappy weather. Winter, we're getting next to, I won't say next to nothing, but it's really degraded yield out of the system at that point in time. But then in summer, it's absolutely spitting out a whole heap. It's really, really important when you're talking about energy services and the integration of renewable energy into a facility like this that you actually understand exactly how PV systems operate and behave. This is the actual real-world output from the PV system. It's not from this building, but we've got it under 4 distinct conditions. The orange line at the bottom is a really rubbish Melbourne day, July, May, crap weather, getting next to nothing. The red is pretty typical of Melbourne weather in terms of you've got cloud cover coming over and you'll have the generation of the system spiking and then falling away as there's cloud cover. You've got to understand that that's integrating with a really complex electrical system within the building as well. So that your grid input is rising and falling with that falling and rising renewable input. The blue is an absolute bluebird cracking mid-season day, not too hot, and it's pumping out as much renewable energy as absolutely possible. So when you integrate this into a facility like this, with the objective that this facility had, it's really important to understand, particularly when we come to the concept of the energy storage, it's really important to understand the behaviour of PV systems. This is the actual PV output from this facility, from the 500 kilowatt. There is an issue that we're resolving with the accuracy. We think that the meters need calibration and change because it shouldn't be maxing out. A 500 kilowatt peak system shouldn't be maxing out at 290 kilowatt real power. It definitely won't max out at 500. There'll be losses, but it should be much higher than 290. So that's another issue that we're working through. That's the power output from the PV system last week. And then the big question is, well, as an overall total, what are we actually looking at from the renewables contribution to the whole facility? And as Thorsten touched upon, the estimate was 14%, and the data is looking like that as well. What you're seeing is the total electricity input from the grid, plus the yellow, which is your renewable contribution from your on-site generation, giving you the total electricity demand of the facility. So again, in summer, you can see that it's a pretty sizable chunk. It's definitely not going to be, as a built environment energy services professional, this is entirely consistent with what I would have expected. I think there's a lot of misconceptions of PV in the built environment that it's going to reduce your energy consumption by 60, 70, 80%. In commercial facilities, that's not necessarily the case, given the sheer volume of electricity that they consume. But it's still a really good outcome because it's 14% of cost and electricity that you're not actually procuring from the grid. In terms of export, again, going back to this dynamic nature of the output of PV systems and understanding export, there's very, very minimal export from this facility, but these are snips from the bills for January, February and March. January, there was 54 kilowatt hours of electricity that was exported, next to nothing. In Feb, 77, and then obviously as we start to lose that yield performance from the PV system moving into winter, So we've got the compounding impact of rising electricity input because the energy demand of the facility is increasing, but you're getting less out of your PV system, so that naturally but that is next to no export, and really the issue of export is a bit of an interesting one on this project, because the fundamental basis for the thermal energy storage was that with a very, very large PV system, you're going to have lots of export, and instead of exporting, what you want to do is run the heat pumps to charge the thermal energy storage, such that you're not just rejecting energy to the grid for a very, very low cost, but you're actually using it to generate thermal energy to store to then use in the pool. Our deep dive into the thermal energy storage isn't as deep as we'd like at this stage, but we think that there possibly is some lessons learned around the incorporation of energy storage and the fundamental concept of assuming that there's going to be export and being able to harvest that export. We'll avoid that export through charging energy storage, particularly thermal energy storage, which is, it's an analog form of energy. It's not a digital battery. It's an analog form of energy. So you've got control systems that need to turn on, heat pump needs to ramp up, and all sorts of things to charge that battery. So fundamentally, that is our deep dive is occurring into the energy storage system. That is me, probably gone horribly over time.